webinar. I'm Greg Watkins, Executive Director of BCCT, and it's my great pleasure today to be working with a relatively new member to the Chamber, DFDL. Our speaker will introduce the company a little bit later, but our webinar today is entitled How to Handle Workforce Restructuring in Thailand During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Our speaker, Kun Kraison Runkun, is partner of DFDL Thailand. He specializes in merger and acquisitions, foreign direct investment, public-private partnerships, corporate and commercial matters, regulatory compliance, competition law, and human resources and employment. And he has in-depth expertise in many sectors, including oil, gas, energy, renewables, EPCs, aviation, F&B, manufacturing, and trading, including finance, fintech, and tech startups. He holds a Bachelor of Law degree from Thammasat and a Master's in Law from Durham University in the UK. As with all our webinars, please do pose your questions or let us have any comments using the Q&A and the chat buttons at the foot of your Zoom screens. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Kun Kraison. A very warm welcome to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to have a chance to speak here today. And as a new member of the Chamber, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you a little bit very briefly on our practice and presence in these regions of DFDL. So DFDL has been established and in operation since 1994. We start our practice and our office in Laos and Cambodia, focusing on emerging market, and our main practice in the past has been infrastructure and project financing in relation to it. But gradually we have expanded to cover more and more, and right now we consider ourselves a full service law firm in ASEAN. And our office coverage right now, we can cover all of ASEAN's countries except for Malaysia and Brunei. However, we have a number of alliances that can provide you with a single point of contact service if you have any question or legal assistance required for the regional works in this region. And we also want to mention a bit that we also have a sister law firm, Kinstella, in Eastern Europe, which we share the same DNA and entities, where we focus on emerging markets. So Kinstella itself has a number of offices in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, just for your information. Our core practice as a full service law firm, of course, we can provide you legal assistance in all type of practice. But our key practice, as you can see from the slide, that we have an internal practice where we will have a regional team with a technical expertise that can work with each office for specific projects that we can help. So it includes, of course, project financing, infrastructure, which has been our core practice for the past 20 years, and also merger and acquisition and banking finance. So all the typical type of project, we would have a regional team dedicated for each practice. Also, we also have a dedicated desk for clients from specific countries. For example, China desk, French desk, India desk, Japan desk, so Korea desk. So in desk support is that we will have a dedicated lawyer that can have a native ability to speak the language of the client to also complement what we usually provide as well. That's very brief introduction of the FDL. Just today, the reason why we want to have this speak a little bit with you all is because we have gathered a number of experience from projects and court disputes that we work on during last year when the first wave of pandemic hit us. So we have helped a number of clients in going through finding solutions in terms of workforce management during our difficult times in business. So essentially what we want to discuss with you today is on what type of measure that we have seen in the market that has been implemented and what is the legal requirements around that and the development of court case in relation to it. So just a bit of current measures right now. So as you may know, all of you may know, that right now, Bangkok is considered as a dark red zone and certain lockdown measures has suspended type of businesses in Bangkok. For example, restaurants and eateries, there will be certain restriction around that. And a number of type of service are still suspended. Therefore, there will be a need to consider HR measures. Just give you a brief vaccination stage right now, as you can see. So first jab is 41% and second jab is around 19.33%. So this brings to the question of what employers can do in case that their employees, a number of them receive full vaccination and a number of them may have yet done so. So just to give you a bit of update on this, as we have seen the publication by the Department of Labor Protection and Welfare, is acceptable right now that the employers can restrict the employees who have yet been fully vaccinated to not to come to the office. So that is the power of the employer to do so. However, the employer need to continue making payment of salary during the time when the employee are unable to work. Otherwise, you need to consider to have to enter into work arrangement in this respect to really ensure that you comply with the law, which we will discuss shortly. So there's a number of ways to really have an agreement or to implement in terms of human resource administration during this pandemic. You can see from the slide right now that essentially the available measure that we have seen in the market can be separated into two types of categories. One is where you need a consent with the employees, and another is where you can the employer can do unilaterally. So we want to focus on the first typical set of measures that being implemented a lot as we have seen in last year and earlier this year, which is voluntary unpaid leave, reduced working hours, deferred salary payment and bonus, redeployment, suspension of business and workforce rotation. The first set is working time and salary adjustment. So essentially under Thai law, working time and salary are considered a work conditions. So any change or adjustment of working time or salary would require a consent from the employees. So what we have seen in market practice, condition of when there is a need, when the employer need to adjust the working time and salary, there must be a town hall explaining a financial difficulty of the companies, or explaining the suspension order by the government. But in any case, whenever you want to change the work conditions, which is basically the law define that any terms or agreement in relation to the employment is considered as a work condition. So any change to which will require a consent from the employees, what being implemented, for example, working time adjustment. We see the most where the employer reduced the working time from 5 days to 4 days, for example, so that the employee salary will reduce around 20% to 25%. In this case, you need a clear consent from the employee. Otherwise, the employee can raise a claims against the employer with the LPW or with the labor court. And okay, so working time adjustment, that is so, or work condition adjustment, you need a consent. So another, what we see in practice is that the employer will try to convince or conduct a town hall explaining difficulty that the employer facing and the need that certain work restructuring needs to be implemented. The successful case that we have seen is when the employer can show to or demonstrate to all the employees what is the financial problems. For example, the direct hit of revenue, significantly reduction of revenue from the employer are something that once demonstrated to the employees, and the employee have a very high chance to really understand of the situation and are more willing to comply with the request of the employers. Another aspect that we have seen is that if there is a clear example from the executive or management that the executive and the management have been the first group of people that take a cut or take an adjustment, then that's another meaningful way to really convince the employees. So what we have seen, the successful procedure is that the management take the first hit, then managers, management discuss with managers to join in, and then after the manager, then there will be the employees as in organization wide. We also see that one of the measures that would really help is to also allow certain type of employee with low level of wage to be exempt from this type of salary cut or salary adjustment. Then we see the successful plan implementation. The problem about this process is that you need a consent from the employees. So there will be clear possibility that some of the employees will not accept the proposed arrangement. What we have seen and the tools that the employers have is around other aspect, not the agree payment package or entitlement package that already provide to the employees. So salary freeze is one of the tools that the employer can think of or implement further after the employer start to see the result of the program when they offer to all the employees. Salary freeze does not require a consent from the employee because it is not considered as a reduction of the salary, right? It just limits the employee in the future of this as increase of the salary. Another tools for the employers to think of once they see the program results is also to limit the bonus to be paid to the employees in the year end. So this is one of the two tools that the employer can use when they want to assess after they see the result, whether the level of acceptance of employees are sufficient to manage the adjustment of the cost. One of the ways that the employer can implement right away unilaterally without a consent from the employees is suspension of business. The suspension of business requires a proof of justification to implement these measures. So in general, the law requires that the employer must have a business necessity to do so. So significant reduce of revenue or purchase orders have been used as a valid ground to implement the suspension of business. Just for your information, suspension of business can be in whole or in part. So what we have seen in the market is that sometimes the employer can split the employee into two groups so that they can work in rotation for example, for factory operation. So in that case, the number of time required to work by the employees will be less than usual. The business necessity ground, however, will still oblige the employer to make a payment of at least 75% of the employee wage during the suspension period. But in any case, the court already recognized that in case of a force majeure, then the employer is not required to make any payment if the business is suspended. We have seen in the court ruling that we involved that the court already agreed and upheld where our client has imposed a business suspension during the early time, during the first wave of pandemic, where they need to close down their business as an indirect result of the government lockdown measure at the time. So in the court ruling, we've seen pandemic. The court recognized that pandemic is a force majeure, and therefore the unilateral suspension of business is acceptable, and the employer, in case of force majeure, is not required to make payment of a salary during the force majeure period. So this different from business necessity ground, where you need to make payment of 75%. However, the recent trend that we have seen, so just to clarify a bit further, those business that are subject directly to the government restriction order to close their business can invoke this force majeure suspension right away, immediately. But there are also a group of business that rely heavily on those business that are subject to the closure, which could heavily affect it as well. So in our case, we have seen applications, service providers, those who are affected by the closure of the restaurant or the closure of the hotel last year. So with this business that are indirectly affected, but the effect is clear and demonstrable to the court also upheld that they also can declare a force majeure suspension of business. But recently, what we have seen when we discussed with the court in recent case, the court start to view that during the first wave force majeure declaration for those business that are indirectly hit by the pandemic are acceptable. But since the first wave, it has been some times from April last year for the business operator to adjust to make any necessary adjustment to their business. So they have enough time to prepare themselves for the pandemic situation. Therefore, the court start to express that for those business operators that are indirectly affected, the court might not recognize force majeure suspension at this time around. So this has been a discussion by the court in recently, but we have yet to see the update ruling at this period of time. So this remains to be seen whether the court will use the same principle compared to last year in terms of force majeure suspension of business on the ground force majeure. So another issues, of course, after the after the employer have exhausted the options that the employer have, so one of the last option will be redundancy. So redundancy, as you may know, is unilateral right for the employer to do redundancy, and redundancy in Thailand is not subject to prior consultation with the employees, so the employers can do it right away. However, redundancy will have a risk of unfair dismissal, and based on the court rulings and Supreme Court ruling that we have seen, to really succeed in defending unfair dismissal claims, it requires demonstration of two aspects. One, the fair ground of redundancy. For example, continual economic loss has been accepted by the Thai court as an acceptable ground for redundancy program. So simply restructuring of the business is not sufficient. If the employer still, for example, its financial statement or balance sheet still show a reasonable profit amount, then the court may point out that the business is still a profitable enterprise. So redundancy should not be the option, should not be the last option in this case. You may have the chance to do other court adjustment by other means in that event. So that has been the practice of the Thai Labor Court, where they will look at whether the employer have a continual economic losses. If not, then there's some risk that it could be declared that the redundancy program can be considered as unfair. Another is the procedure. So the procedure of redundancy, procedure in selecting the employee to be made redundant, also the factor that the court used in Thailand. So the selection process should be criteria for the selection should be objective, fair, and indiscriminate. So the employer need to establish a clear criteria before selecting employee to be subject to redundancy. Otherwise, employers will have a high risk of being deemed that the process is unfair. And just to mention about the extent of damage with respect to the unfair dismissal claim. The Thai court, even though the law is silent on how much the Thai court can grant on the extent of damage, but it has been a long practice by the Thai court to use the last amount of salary multiplied by a number of years of service to be the base calculation formula to calculate for unfair dismissal compensation. And this unfair dismissal compensation is payable on top of the minimum package available at law. As you may know, for example, payment in lieu of advance notice, severance pay, encashment of unused holidays. So unfair dismissal compensation is on top of the standard package. Therefore, in practice, the best approach that a number of employers use is to ensure that those employees affected by redundancy will enter into mutual separation agreement with the employers. Mutual termination or mutual separation agreement is the best way to manage the exposure and cost with respect to redundancy, because mutual termination is equal to resignation. Basically, it is not considered as a termination by the employer, so it technically will not trigger all the minimum package under the labor law, which are applicable to the termination by the employer. However, in practice, the employee will negotiate anyway to get the minimum package. Otherwise, they will not sign the agreement. So yes, so in practice, it's very difficult to get anything lower than the minimum entitlements. However, the room of negotiation are pretty much in the unfair in the negotiation around the unfair dismissal compensation. We have seen varied amount on this to be agreed by the employees. A typical one that we see successful negotiation for mutual termination is around 50% of the potential unfair dismissal compensation that the employee may get if the employee win the case of unfair dismissal claim in the labor court. This has been sort of the numbers where we've seen successful a lot because employers can save significantly on litigation costs compared to the employees, where employee does not have to pay for any litigation costs in labor dispute, because they can ask the assistant by the court staff, and the judge of the labor court have also the power to access the employee to ask question or to demand for proof from the employer in this type of case. So the litigation costs are significantly different between the employees and the employer in the proceedings. Another key reason is also because the employees can get the payment relatively quickly compared to the long process of legal proceedings that we talking about a year or more of the proceedings. So that's why it could be viewed as sort of a good settlement between the employer and the employee if this package can be agreed upon. In exchange of agreeing the payment package, then the employees will waive all of their claims, including unfair dismissal. And the court has upheld all along that if there is any future claim, the court will dismiss that upon the employer prove the existence of mutual termination agreement. Unfortunately, sometimes we've seen that employee, even once they sign this agreement, they still try to attempt to file further claims. So we recommend that mutual termination agreement should clearly state the waiver of the claims. Otherwise, the employees will try to find room to claim for something that they may, once they talk to lawyer, they may try to get more money from the employers. But if the agreement is clear enough, then what we have seen is that the court simply dismiss and even help the employer to give more pressure to the employees to not to pursue the case and try to convince to dismiss the case. What the typical claims that we see where the employee try to find some room and seek further claims is, for example, payment of provident fund. So you need to ensure that payment of the provident fund will be addressed in the mutual termination, because technically speaking, payment of the provident fund is the obligation of the provident fund manager to be paid to the employee. Therefore, if there is no clear discussion around this, the employee may try to claim this amount, since it's not obligation of the employer to make this payment, but in practice, provident fund manager may transfer the money to the employer and the employer transfer that to the employee. So this must take cautions. Another typical claim is the legal arguments around the calculation of the severance pay or base salary, because a typical claims that we see is that agreement around base salary, because in Thailand, any other than base salary, but any type of payment that which are paid directly to the employee in a fixed amount and paid periodically could be deemed part of the base salary for the purpose of calculation of entitlements under the labor law. So this typical claim can be raised by the employee, because they may try to claim that actually their severance pay are not paid in full because the calculation is wrong. So in case that you don't have a mutual termination, then this might be a typical thing that will be part of the claim, that they will try to get more severance pay in the process. Yes, so as I will, for the purpose of this discussion today, I will not go into very much detail on what type of entitlements that the employee will get if they are terminated by the employer, because I understand that everyone here may have some information around that already. But yes, just want to provide here that I have raised that even though unilateral termination is the right of the employer and it can be done easily by the employer. However, the risk exposure in terms of unfair dismissal, as well as the chance of or the room for negotiation are quite limited with the employee. So it has been the general approach that it should not be the first approach for the employer when the employer want to explore the option in terms of human resource restructuring, as I have discussed. So yes, that has been a brief discussion about the current issues and options that the employer may have during this pandemic time. So happy to have additional question in this. Yes.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, over to you. Please do type your questions in for Kun Chrysorn to answer. Okay, Kun Supasit. Okay, in case the company has been paid mobile phone allowance as a fixed amount when the employees submitted invoice in any price? Okay.
So maybe I can address that quite quickly. So any form of fixed payment, however, with the proof of disbursement, that will be clearly proved that so that will not be part of the salary, because the court review that that is a welfare. You can clearly prove that it's a welfare because the company will pay upon the employee providing the proof of payment. Normally, the problem will be around a fixed amount of cash that the employers provide to the employees. That creates difficulties around the base salary calculation.
Okay, Kun Nikom, can you type your question into Q&A, please?
And maybe another interesting development from the Thai Labor Court is that in recent years we saw that an employees that has been seconded or moved to Thailand in the from the global type of business, we start seeing rulings where the court use payment from all countries. So for example, if you get certain portion of your salary from UK and certain portion from Thailand, if the facts of the case is that the employee work in the same group, work for the same group, there is no difference in terms of work operation. So the employee simply work in Thailand and you receive the salary from two sources, then the court will use these two sources of income for the purpose of calculation of salary.
Okay, Kun Chrysorn, it was mentioned at the beginning of the session that salary freeze is possible for employers to do without employees' consent. What's the percentage of reduction that's allowed?
Salary reduction must come with a suspension of business if the employer want to unilaterally implement this. So you need to prove business necessity, as I mentioned. For example, reduction of order, reduction of the revenue, then you can announce the suspension of business, meaning that you can reduce the amount of working time of the employees, and that will or stop employee from working at all, but you still need to make payment at least 25%. So we're talking about 25% reduction that is in the power of the employees. However, if you are the business subject to the lockdown or closure order directly from the government, then you don't have to pay anything because it's considered as a force majeure suspension of business. The employees have the right to receive relief, financial relief from Social Security Office right now. I believe 70% of the salary cap, which is around 15,000. So we're talking about 10,000 baht support during the lockdown or the closures. This is the financial relief existing. The government also have 2,500 payable to the affected business. So to basically the government just simply pay to our accounts directly for the affected business. And that is around 2,500 paid in August. And right now in this month, the government will make another payment. I think in this, either this week or next week, the employee will also get that cash relief. Yeah.
Okay, congrats. On a quick question from Tom. Has there been any court decisions on the definition of substantially affected if the employee is asked to move to a new office location, but refuses, resigns, and claims severance pay?
Okay, we've seen the written policy of Department of Labor Protection and Welfare. I don't think that's a court ruling, but it's the radius of, I think, 10 kilometers, if I remember correctly. But in any case, there's a written written opinion by the Department of Labor and Welfare around this. But we view that this is not applicable to all cases, because the proof of change, the proof of effect to the ordinary living can be varied. If relocation is still in the, let's say, trend or BTS network, then the employer should argue that it does not significantly change the life of the employees. Or if the employers provide certain additional amount of money or welfare in support of the increased burden that need to bear by the employees, then this also have been viewed as an acceptable measures by the employers.
Okay, I think that's it for Q&A. So huge thanks again, Kun Kraison. It's great to be working with DFDL. I hope we can again, and I hope it won't be too long before we see you again at a physical event that the chamber.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully,
yeah,
because that will be a clear indicator that we normalize a new normal life will come back to Bangkok.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to that. So thank you to all the ladies and gentlemen for attending. It's great to have you with us, and we hope you can join on the next webinar in a few days' time. Fantastic. Thanks again, Kun Kraison.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you everyone for attending today.